big-time fight coming up this weekend at Flyweight. We have Japan's Tatsuro Taira taking on New England's own Carlos Candelario, a fight that was scheduled a couple of weeks ago, but unfortunately it was a late scratch at the final hour with Candelario dropping off the card. So the promotion decided to rebook it. We've already talked about it at length. We're going to throw it on back to that original video, update the odds, and give you a final pick and prediction on this one. Listen, Japanese MMA fans, stand up. The former Shuto flyweight champ Tatsuro Taira making his UFC debut against the New England Cartel's own Carlos the Canon Candelario, and this is a fight I know a lot of people can get behind, because if you're a fan of Japanese MMA and you're looking at the UFC, you're gonna see not a lot of Japanese MMA fighters. I mean, Matt and I talked about it before we started filming, but realistically, you have Takashi Sato, you have Mizuki Inoue, you also have Kanako Murata, and that's it. Like, I find that really hard to believe until you really dig into it. I mean, you think about it, the UFC purchased Pride, there was so much talent, and now it's kind of in an odd place. You never see shows in Japan, or very rarely you ever do. And long gone are the days of Yushin Okami taking on Anderson Silva multiple times. So coming up this weekend for Tatsuro Taira, this guy's on an absolute tear. I mean, his amateur career was insane. His pro career, he's already 10-0 at the ripe old age of 22 and 3 months. And the things that this guy is able to do inside of the cage really is impressive. Now, he's taking on a Candelario who, well, very rarely do we ever see fighters get signed to the UFC off a loss, but that's where he finds himself, because Dana White disagreed with the judges in the split decision win that Victor Altamirano was able to get over him on Dana White's Contender Series. And I have a lot to say about that fight that kind of plays into this one. But if you know anything about the styles of these two guys, it should result in a fun fight, because Candelario likes to grapple, likes that top pressure, likes the ground and pound and the submissions. Tatsuro Taira is one of the more, how could I say it, technical guys when he figures out the exact position that he wants when he's on the ground. Doesn't rush too fast. He really, really does take his time. But man, this guy's slick once it gets to that mat.
Sometimes we talk about fighters at middleweight, light heavyweight, and heavyweight, and how they grapple like people who are smaller than themselves. Like, Antonio Carlos Jr. is always a guy who comes to mind. He's a little sloppy on the feet and whatnot, but when it comes to grappling, he can scramble very, very fast, and he looks super high level.
Look at what he did in the first round of his fight last week.
Tatsuro is kind of the opposite of that. He grapples like someone much bigger than himself. He gets a lot of odd trip takedowns from the clinch, and if you've watched any of his film, you can tell how physically strong he is. He's someone who does really like to get on the inside of his fighters and try to work that clinch exchange. He'll go for knee taps, he'll go for some upper body throws too. It's a really high level wrestling game that he does have, and like you said, he's only 22 years old, and the fact that he's 10-0 and he does have amateur fights, it's kind of wild that he is as experienced as he is for how young of age that he is. But this fight against Candelario will be really interesting, because it's all going to come down to who can get on top of the other one. If Tatsuro can get on top, I do think his grappling is sound enough to where he's heavy enough, he can push Candelario down and at least be positionally dominant enough to start winning minutes and rounds from the judges. But I do think Candelario will have an edge in some of the scrambles and any of the positions that aren't set like you had mentioned. I really do think he can find a leg, start to sweep. I don't think he's going to pull like a Claudio Puelles Clay Guida, because that was insane. But I do think that he will have the advantage when we aren't in those set positions. And let's say Tatsuro does go for one of those big takedowns and it can't immediately establish that top position. Well, those normally do create quite a bit of momentum from the trips, and if there is a lot of momentum behind them, Candelario might be able to position himself to end up on top in one of those exchanges. And if that is the case, he does have really good ground and pound, and I do think that's sort of his X factor in this matchup. I do think Tatsuro, he's a little bit more going to hold you down and try to take the fight out of you as it goes on, but Candelario is going to make you pay for every second you're under him. He is hellacious with some of his ground and pound, and I could see that being his best path to victory.
The weirdest part about it for Carlos Candelario, he competed on season 1 of Dana White's Contender Series in 2017. He was able to get a win as a plus 180 underdog against Ronaldo Candido. So in that fight, he gets the win, but he tears up his knee. So from 2017 to about 2019, he's out because of the knee injury. Then he takes a fight and hurts his knee again, and then he's out for another extended period of time. He's 2-0 with CES against one tricky fighter in Miguel Restrepo. But the trouble is, in the fight before Contender Series, then in his fight against Victor Altamirano, he tended to slow down a lot after putting out a high amount of work in his first round. So for Candelario, when I watched that Altamirano fight, I thought that Victor was able to win round 2, round 3. Candelario handily won the first round. Yeah. And I was very surprised, A, it was a split decision, and how much Dana White disagreed with it to make Carlos Candelario the first ever person signed off a loss. Now, maybe it was because he felt bad that he tore his knee up and he was in the first season, and now we're, 4 years later? But regardless, you look at Tatsuro Taira, you talk about it. When he's so dominant with his upper body, it's crazy to imagine that just back in 2019, Taira was fighting at strawweight. And then he fought at bantamweight. And then he fought at flyweight. So it really is weird because when you look at him in his fights, I can say this because I feel like we're both in the same boat of he has chicken legs. They're very skinny.
They are.
But his upper body's very strong. And
something I can't relate to.
We talked about both of these guys with their striking. Obviously, I favor Candelario with the striking. When it's on the feet, he's a much better striker. He throws more volume. He throws with great power. For Taira, he tends to throw one single shot and then reset and take a little bit of time. He extends himself, drops his hand on this side, and then pulls it back. He's got really, really effective leg kicks. That's probably his best strike. He really plants on his lead leg, whips that kick out there, brings it back. He's very quick with that. But when I watch him just strike, it's almost like he's trying to think as he strikes, whereas he can flow with his grappling. And when he thinks when he strikes, he leaves his head up, and sometimes when he's on the defensive, and this is really plays well into Candelario's skill set, Candelario moves forward with pressure, throws a lot of power, tries to take you down. Taira on the back foot will block punches with his arms and leave his head up. And it's one of those things that it does scare me, especially in a fight against Candelario and as he moves forward. Now, the good thing about Tatsuro Taira, about 10 weeks ago, he makes a trip over from Japan to the States, training at Extreme Couture. And I want to make sure that I get this one right, Matt, because he also has fellow Shuto Bantamweight champ with him, and that is a great thing to have. So, two buddies, they're over there, they're training in the States, they're getting ready for a fight like this. What I did was I took the characters of his name in Japanese, threw them into Google, translated it, read a bunch of Yahoo Japan articles about him, and they said that his coach is Ryota Matsure, who is the Shuto junkie, so you like to see that one. And the best guy that he can train with, or that he's found training with at Extreme Couture, is Amir Albazi. And oh yeah, it's Ryu Okada is who we went with, the Shuto Bantamweight champ. But a guy like Amir Albazi is pretty damn good to train with if you're getting ready for Candelario, wouldn't you say?
I would agree, but the difference is Candelario is going to have like Rob Font to help him train. And I think that's a pretty big X factor too, because although Rob Font might not train in that exact style, he is a much better fighter. So I do think that both guys do have a very good training situation set up around them, and that is a big key factor for this fight. Here's a weird wrinkle though, and I'm curious to get your opinion on this. I think if Candelario wins the first round on his striking, he's going to win this fight because he doesn't actually have to expend that much energy to win the first round on the feet. He's not someone who will flurry as much as he'll throw some big, heavy single shots. And if he's able to do that and just win the first round, I don't really think he's going to have to expend as much energy, and then he might still have the chance to out-grapple in round 2 or 3. The difference is, if he wins the first round with his grappling, I think it's going to have him much more spent in the second and third round and make him much more available to be taken down from Tatsuro as the fight progresses.
So if we bring it on back, rope it on in, we have a look at the odds for this one. Taira at a minus 240 favorite. You have Carlos Candelario on the comeback at a plus 190. And if we have a look over on Tapology for the total votes, Matt, I'll leave it open to interpretation. But I suspect that these are going to be the same as a couple of weeks ago. I'm going to say over under 75% Taira.
I'll say over.
I'm going to say over. It is well over 470 total votes. You have 69% taking Taira to win by submission. The 9% that have Candelario. 80% by decision. So, Matt, again, I said last week with Taira, the only thing is he has taken on a decent level competition over in Japan. Very unorthodox takedown attempts from him, but there's some things that I definitely like out of Candelario. Definitely the better striker. Definitely the better offensive wrestler with his lower body attacks, especially in the first round. But as it goes on, second round, third round, he kind of wanes a little bit, and you like the activity out of Taira. So for me, I'm going with Japan's Taira, but this is again another one of those fights I keep off my card.
For Tatsuro, I do worry a little bit that he got started too young. I do worry that maybe we will see his prime early. We might see his prime end a little bit early, but I don't think that's going to affect him in his UFC debut. That's just something to look forward to down the road, because I do agree, he does have a very high level of competition on his resume, and he's been having tough fights since a very, very young age, so I just worry he might have taken a little bit too much tread off the tires before he came to the UFC, but I still see him winning this weekend.
Matt going with Japan's Eric Silva. I'm in agreement on this one. We have a big time fight coming up in the main event at light heavyweight. Jan Blachowicz, the former champ, taking on Serbian Thunder, Alexandr Rakic. You're not going to want to miss it. Let's keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it.